Alright travelers, let's talk about Hydro characters in Genshin Impact. Ever since the game dropped, Hydro has been that element. Always at the top, always relevant. Why? Because it reacts with every other element and brings some of the best reactions in the game. From freezing enemies solid to vaporizing them into oblivion, Hydro is a must-have in any strong team. But with so many Hydro characters out there, who's really worth your Primogems? That's exactly what we're here to figure out. Whether you love Candace's versatile support, Nilou's insane bloom damage, or Tartaglia's high-risk, high-reward playstyle, there's a Hydro unit for everyone. But not all of them are created equal. So in this video, we're ranking every Hydro character based on their usefulness, so you can decide who to build and who to bench. Let's get into it. I'm quickly moving on to the video. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. Alright, let's talk about Candace, one of the more underrated Hydro characters in Genshin Impact. If you're a fan of parry-based gameplay, she's definitely worth a look. Her elemental skill lets you absorb incoming damage and then unleash a Hydro counterattack, and if you time it right, you can skip the charge-up animation entirely. Sounds cool, right? Well, the problem is that her damage multipliers aren't exactly amazing, which makes her struggle compared to other Hydro units. Still, if you enjoy that reactive playstyle, she's got a unique charm. Now, her elemental burst is where things get interesting. It gives your entire party a normal attack infusion, allowing even non-Hydro characters to dish out some water-based damage. On top of that, when you switch characters, Candace releases a Hydro wave, adding a bit of extra damage. But here's the catch. This setup doesn't always work well because if you're using a character that relies heavily on normal attacks, you usually don't want to switch them out mid-combo. It's a fun mechanic, but a bit awkward in practice. That being said, if you manage to max out her constellations, she becomes a much stronger support. Her buffs get better, her Hydro application improves, and she can actually enable some solid team synergies. Is she the best Hydro character out there? Not really. But is she fun to play? Absolutely. If you enjoy a more technical playstyle and like experimenting with different team setups, Candace might just surprise you. Alright, let's talk about the Hydro Traveler. Now, every time we get a new region in Genshin Impact, our good old Traveler picks up a fresh set of abilities. You'd think by now they'd have a super versatile kit, but Hoyoverse seems determined to keep them in check. Hydro Traveler? They bring consistent Hydro damage with their skill and burst, which sounds great, until you realize they have to stay on the field for most of it to work. And let's be real, the damage just isn't high enough to justify keeping them there. Now, don't get me wrong, Hydro Traveler isn't useless. They can work in reaction-heavy teams where off-field characters handle the heavy lifting. You set up some Electro, Cryo, or Dendro effects, swap in the Traveler, and let the Hydro do its thing. But here's the catch. You better have a solid shielder on your team, because if you're relying on Hydro Traveler to dish out constant damage while standing in the middle of a fight, you're in for a rough time. At the end of the day, Hydro Traveler is one of those, it works, but why would you kind of characters. If you're really attached to the Traveler and love their playstyle, sure, go for it. But with so many Hydro characters that do more damage, provide better support, or just have flashier kits, it's hard to justify using them over someone else. So unless you're feeling experimental or just want to give them a shot for fun, you might want to leave this one on the bench. Barbara is one of the most reliable healers in Genshin Impact, and the best part? She's completely free. As the Deaconess of the Church of Favonius, she's all about spreading joy, and healing, of course. Her elemental skill, Let the Show Begin, surrounds her with a Hydro-infused musical aura that heals your active character over time and even deals a little Hydro DMG to nearby enemies. Sounds great, right? Well, there's a catch. This skill also applies the wet status to your character, which means you're one wrong move away from getting frozen by a cryo enemy or electro-charged into oblivion. Not ideal when you're trying to stay alive. Her elemental burst, Shining Miracle, is where she truly shines as a support. This ability instantly restores a massive amount of HP to the entire party, making it a lifesaver in tough battles. Whether you're taking on weekly bosses or getting overwhelmed by mobs, Barbara can bring your team back from the brink in an instant. But there's a downside. Her cooldowns are a bit long, and since she doesn't provide much beyond healing, she's not the most versatile character in the game. If you're looking for a unit that can heal and buff or deal solid damage, you might want to look elsewhere. That being said, Barbara is still a fantastic option for new players and anyone who needs a dependable healer. She's easy to build, scales well with HP, and works in a variety of teams, especially those that rely on hydro reactions. Just be careful when using her elemental skill, or you might find yourself stuck in an ice cube when you least expect it. Mona Magistus, the self-proclaimed astrologist extraordinaire of Mondstadt. If you've played Genshin Impact for a while, you've probably come across her at some point, whether in your own roster or as that elusive standard banner 5-star that keeps dodging you. As a Hydro Catalyst user, Mona brings a unique playstyle to the table, especially with her alternate sprint, Illusory Torrent, which lets her quite literally glide across water like she's some kind of magical speedboat. Her elemental skill, Mirror Reflection of Doom, isn't just fancy wordplay. It summons a phantom that taunts enemies and dishes out continuous hydro damage, which is great for setting up reactions or just keeping enemies distracted while you unleash havoc elsewhere. But Mona's real strength? Her elemental burst, Stellaris Phantasm. This move doesn't just look stunning, it applies an omen status to enemies, increasing the damage they take. That means if you time things right, you can set up some ridiculously strong combos with your main DPS. Pair her with Pyro, Electro, or Cryo units, and suddenly you've got Vaporize, Electrocharged, or Frozen reactions going off left and right. She's been a staple for boosting team damage since the early days of Genshin, and despite power creep, she still holds her own as a solid support. Now, let's be real, Mona isn't sitting at the top of the tier lists anymore, and that's mainly because newer characters have come in with even stronger buffs and more versatile kits. But if you've got her in your lineup, she's still more than capable of helping you clear tough content. Whether you're using her for quick swapping hydro applications, reaction setups, or just zooming across the water for fun, Mona remains one of the most unique and fun characters in Genshin Impact. Plus, who doesn't love her dramatic flair and endless financial struggles? Tartaglia, our favorite harbinger with a serious case of dual personalities when it comes to combat. On the surface, he's a bow user, but let's be real. Nobody pulls for Childe just to use his bow attacks. The real fun begins when he activates his elemental skill and ditches the ranged combat for some up-close and personal hydro-infused melee action. Back when he first dropped, he was an absolute game-changer, and everyone wanted a piece of that Fatui action. He had insane hydro application, an incredibly satisfying playstyle, and a flashy burst that could wipe out entire enemy waves. But of course, Genshin's meta waits for no one. As time went on, Childe's weaknesses became more apparent. That elemental skill cooldown? Yeah, it can be brutal if you don't time your rotations perfectly. You mistime it and boom! You're stuck awkwardly plinking away with a bow while your team waits for your melee stance to come back. And let's not forget power creep. With newer characters bringing crazier damage, better multipliers, and more forgiving cooldowns, Childe slowly lost his spot as the go-to hydro DPS. He's still strong, but he's definitely more niche now compared to the latest and greatest. That said, he's far from irrelevant. If you pair him with the right team, especially with off-field pyro applicators like Zhangling, he can still dish out some serious damage. His hydro application is still top tier, and if you master his playstyle, he's an incredibly fun and rewarding character to use. Sure, he's not as meta-defining as he once was, but for those who enjoy his fluid combat and high skill ceiling, Childe remains one of the most satisfying characters to play in Genshin Impact. Alright, let's talk about Sigewinne, Fontaine's adorable yet surprisingly powerful healer in Genshin Impact. On paper, she does exactly what you'd expect, keeps your team alive with solid healing. And don't get me wrong, she does this job exceptionally well. The problem? The current meta doesn't really favor pure healers. Why settle for just healing when you can have characters like Bennett, who not only top off your health bar, but also throw in a massive ATK boost? It's like choosing plain bread when you could have a whole sandwich with all the fixings. And then there's Kokomi. Yep, the other hydro healer in the game, and let's be real, she's kind of a powerhouse. Unlike Sigewinne, Kokomi brings insane AoE hydro application to the table, making her one of the best enablers for freeze and bloom teams. Sigewinne, on the other hand, has some burst damage potential, but it's not exactly game-changing unless you invest heavily in her constellations. And let's be honest, who's out here casually pulling for a C6 5-star? If you are, I respect it, But for most players, that's just not happening. That said, if you love her character or just really want a dedicated healer, she's still a solid pick. She's not breaking the meta, but she'll keep your team alive and occasionally dish out some respectable damage. Just don't expect her to replace Kokomi or become a must-have unit anytime soon. Fontaine's got plenty of strong Hydro characters, and unfortunately, Sigewinni's just not making waves the way some of them are. Xingqiu! If you've been playing Genshin Impact for a while, you already know how busted this guy is. He's been a top-tier support since day one, and honestly, he's still one of the best Hydro applicators in the game. His Elemental Burst creates those iconic rain swords that unleash Hydro damage every time you land a normal attack, making him a dream pick for reaction-heavy teams. Whether you're running Vaporize, Electrocharged, or Freeze comps, this guy just gets the job done effortlessly. Now, his only real downside is his energy recharge situation. His elemental skill does generate particles, but let's be real, it's not always enough. That's where weapons like the Sacrificial Sword or Favonius Sword come in. They help him get his burst back up faster, so he can keep raining down Hydro non-stop. Once you get his rotation down and build him properly, you won't even notice the energy issue. Plus, those swords give him a bit of extra utility, which is always a nice bonus. At the end of the day, Xingqiu isn't just a good support, he's an essential one. If you're serious about team synergy and elemental reactions, you'll want him in your roster. He might be a 4-star character, but his impact on a team is easily 5-star level. So if you haven't built him yet, what are you waiting for? Start farming those talents and artifacts, because once you get used to playing with him, there's no going back. Alright, let's talk about Kamisato Ayato, one of the smoothest Hydro characters in Genshin Impact. If you're looking for a character who brings both style and efficiency to the battlefield, Ayato is your guy. His elemental skill lets him enter the Takemaguri Konka state, turning his normal attacks into rapid AoE Hydro slashes. And the best part? He stacks Namisen while attacking, boosting his damage even further. If you love fast-paced swordplay with some flashy water effects, Ayato is easily one of the most satisfying characters to use. Now, while Ayato excels at dishing out consistent Hydro DMG, he's not perfect. His Elemental Burst provides a wide AoE Hydro effect, which is great for setting up reactions, but his high energy cost can be a bit of a struggle without a solid battery. Plus, he isn't built for huge single-strike nukes like some other DPS units. That being said, when it comes to handling mobs, clearing domains, or even just flexing some stylish swordplay, Ayato still holds his own as a top-tier pick. So, is Ayato worth pulling? Absolutely. If you enjoy a fast-hitting playstyle with reliable Hydro application, he's a fantastic addition to any team. He pairs well with Electro and Cryo units for easy Vaporize or Freeze setups, making him super versatile. Just make sure you have the right supports to keep his energy flowing, and Ayato will carry you through plenty of fights with ease. Sangonomiya Kokomi, the healer who went from being overlooked to an absolute must-have in certain team comps. When she first dropped, a lot of players were skeptical. Her kit seemed underwhelming, her damage was low, and that negative crit rate didn't help. But then, as the meta evolved and Dendro reactions entered the game, Kokomi's true potential started to shine. Her elemental skill, Karage's Oath, is a game-changer. It summons a Baked Karaji that not only dishes out consistent Hydro damage, but also keeps your team alive with passive healing. Suddenly, she wasn't just a healer, she became a top-tier enabler for Hydro-based reactions. Her Elemental Burst takes things even further. Not only does it ramp up her healing and Hydro application, but she can also literally walk on water while it's active. Sure, that might not sound super useful in combat, but it's a fun bonus. More importantly, her burst makes her a perfect support for teams built around Bloom, Hyper Bloom, or Vaporize. She applies Hydro faster than most characters, ensuring that your Dendro and Pyro teammates can trigger reactions constantly. And thanks to her healing, you don't have to worry about self-damage from Bloom cores. It's like having a built-in safety net, while still dealing solid reaction-based damage. At the end of the day, Kokomi is proof that initial impressions aren't everything in Genshin Impact. She might not be flashy, but she's ridiculously reliable. Whether you need a healer, a Hydro enabler, or just someone to help you walk across a lake without using stamina, Kokomi's got your back. If you've been sleeping on her, it might be time to wake up, because in the right team, she's way more than just a support. Alright, so let's dive into one of the coolest Hydro characters in Genshin Impact, Nilou. She's a 5-star sword wielder from Sumeru, and while she might seem niche at first, trust me, she's far more versatile than you'd think. Nilou specializes as an off-field sub-DPS, and her ability, Bountiful Cores, is a game-changer. It deals massive AoE damage, but there's a catch. It only works in a team full of Dendro and Hydro characters. Now, when she first dropped, it made sense why some people were hesitant, but with newer characters like Tignari and Collei, creating that perfect synergy has become easier than ever. When you finally get the right setup, a healer or shielder, a buffer, and of course Nilou, you're going to start seeing some seriously high numbers. The beauty of her kit is that you don't even have to focus too much on crit rate or crit damage, which can be a relief for players who don't want to stress over min-maxing. As long as you can apply Dendro and Hydro consistently, Nilou's damage output will keep you smiling. It's like unlocking a secret weapon. She's simple to play and still so effective. So, if you've been hesitant about bringing her into your team, don't be. The right team composition can make Nilou absolutely shine. It's not about having the most complicated builds. It's about having fun and watching those huge damage numbers pop up on your screen. Nilou's one of those characters who just feels rewarding without the headache, and that's exactly what makes her a great pick for any team. So let's talk about Mualani, one of the most fascinating Hydro characters in Genshin Impact. If you've ever tried her trial in Natlan, you probably had your mind blown by the numbers. I mean, seriously, you can easily rack up over 200,000 damage with the right team, and that's without even using her signature weapon. Now that's a solid chunk of damage, right? The catch is, this number is much higher when you're facing off against a single opponent. When things start to spread out and you're fighting multiple enemies, that big damage can get split up, and it doesn't feel quite as insane anymore. But here's where Mualani gets a little tricky. She relies heavily on something called the phlogiston mechanic, which unfortunately is exclusive to Natlan. Outside of that region, you're kind of stuck without it. And if you don't have enough phlogiston, her skill ends super quickly, making it tough to keep up that high damage. It can feel like a gamble sometimes, especially if enemies are spread out. You'll find yourself trying to make the most of a situation where Mualani's potential is just kind of gone in the wind. In short, while Mualani can absolutely rock some serious damage when everything lines up right, the whole phlogiston thing is a bit of a double-edged sword. If you're not in Natlan or don't have the resources to make the most of her skill, you might feel like you're not fully unlocking her potential. But hey, if you can make it work, she'll absolutely melt through those enemies. It's just about knowing when and where to use her. Neuvillette is one of those characters in Genshin Impact that just feels like an absolute powerhouse. If you're looking for a Hydro character who can melt through the toughest enemies, he's your guy. His abilities are super fun to use and offer a unique playstyle that's both rewarding and satisfying. The best part? His charged attacks. When you consume those Hydro drops with them, you unleash this awesome laser-like attack that does crazy damage. We're talking over 40,000 damage per hit if you've got some good off-field elemental applicators, making Neuvillette a go-to for wiping out enemies in the blink of an eye. Now, let's talk about his abilities. Neuvillette's elemental skill and burst are key to his damage output. His skill creates Hydro drops, and when you use your charged attack, it deals massive damage while consuming the drops. It's like a balancing act though, since he does lose some HP when you use the charged attack, but that's all part of the fun. With the right setup, you can quickly recover that HP, and honestly, it becomes a rhythm that makes playing him feel so smooth and satisfying. Plus, his ability to heal while dishing out damage is perfect for the endgame, where you need that extra layer of sustainability. To really take full advantage of Neuvillette's potential, you'll want to pair him with some off-field elemental applicators. These can easily trigger his Hydro reactions, making him one of the most effective Hydro characters to tackle any content in the game. Whether you're dealing with bosses or clearing domains, his charged attacks can practically delete everything in your path. Neuvillette's fun, dynamic playstyle makes him an absolute must-have for anyone looking to add some serious firepower to their team, especially when it comes to endgame content. Yellen is an absolute powerhouse in Genshin Impact, and if you've been lucky enough to pull her, you know exactly what I'm talking about. She's a 5-star Hydro character who wields a bow, and she's been one of the best for a reason. Her elemental skill already hits hard with Hydro damage, but the real magic happens with her elemental burst. This ability allows her to deal off-field hydro damage over time, while also boosting the overall damage of all characters in the party. It's a perfect combo that makes her an absolute asset to any team. What makes Yellen even more powerful is her synergy with the Hydro Resonance, especially after the recent update that boosts all party members' HP by 25%. Since Yellen scales with HP, this change turned her into an even stronger character, making her even more flexible and useful across a variety of team compositions. Whether you're running a Hydro-focused team or just need someone who can do it all, Yellen fits the bill perfectly. And if you manage to get her to Constellation 6, well, you might as well just stop looking for other characters to round out your team. She becomes an unstoppable force, essentially carrying the entire team. With her ability to increase both hydro damage and your party's overall damage output, she's one of those characters you can just slot in and watch everything crumble. Yellen is a top-tier pick, and if you have her, it's safe to say your team just got a massive upgrade. Furina is hands down one of the best Hydro characters in Genshin Impact, and it's easy to see why. As the Hydro Archon of Fontaine, she's got a kit that's packed with value. Sure, she might seem like a generic off-field support character at first glance, but that's only the surface. Her elemental skill is where the magic happens. It's got 2 different effects that let you adjust based on your team's needs. Whether you're looking for a steady stream of Hydro damage from her 3 creatures that follow enemies around, or you need a burst of healing for your team with a giant AoE, she's got you covered. One of the coolest things about Furina is how much damage she can add to the team. Her ultimate, much like Yellen's, boosts your party's overall damage, so if you're looking for a way to up your DPS without sacrificing your healing potential, she's your girl. It's the kind of synergy that takes her from just another support character to an absolute powerhouse, especially in teams that rely on constant Hydro application for reactions. What really sets Furina apart is her versatility, and the way her kit lets you balance Hydro damage and healing so effortlessly. If you can manage your team's HP, Furina gives you the most Hydro value in the game. She's just as good at dealing damage as she is at keeping your team topped off. Whether you're using her for high-end Spiral Abyss runs or just casual exploration, her ability to switch between damage and healing makes her a top-tier choice for any Hydro-focused team. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.